Okay, I'll click it now.
Good morning or good afternoon, everybody, depending on whether you're in Glasgow or you are participating virtually from Asia or elsewhere in the world. I'm very happy to welcome you to this session today, where we're going to talk about, we're going to focus on Indigenous people and science call for more ambitious NDC in Myanmar. And today we have a very interesting panel with us. We have one virtual participant from the UK, His Excellency Peter Vowles, the British ambassador to Myanmar. We have Mr. Shun So-o, who is the Climate and Energy Program Manager from WWF in Myanmar. And then next to me, I'm very happy also to have Madame No Ii Min, who is coming from, she's the director of the Indigenous Peoples Organization, Promotion of Indigenous and Nature Together, Point. So welcome everybody to this session. We will focus today on hearing the perspective, of course, on science and studies into the potential for renewable energy, making more ambitious NDC in Myanmar. And we will also hear from an Indigenous people point of view, what can be the role be for Indigenous people, what are your views on the NDC, and what are your recommendations for further improvement. And the flow of this session will be that we will have the three interventions from Myanmar as well from here in the room, and then we'll open for question and answers, both from the room as well as virtually. So without further ado, I would like to invite the first speaker, His Excellency Peter Vowles, the British ambassador to Myanmar, to give the opening remark. Please, Mr. Ambassador.
Good morning. Yes, so my name is Pete Vowles. I'm the British Ambassador Designate to Myanmar here in Yangon. I'm really pleased to be able to join, and I'm great to see Myanmar participants in Glasgow. Sorry that I'm not there as well. So the UK's primary focus, I should just say, is obviously to support the efforts of the people of Myanmar to resolve the political crisis and build an inclusive federal democracy. And right now, standing by the people of Myanmar at this time of suffering and crisis. But we cannot forget the long-term importance of climate change for Myanmar. If it hadn't been for the events of the 1st of February, this would be the most important conversation for Myanmar right now. It is urgent and it is important. So given where we are, we need to find creative ways that enable us to keep a focus on the current situation and sustain efforts to respond to the looming climate crisis. I'd like to give an example and talk about forests, which I think is relevant to this conversation today. Two-fifths of the country of Myanmar is covered in forests, the largest forest area in mainland Southeast Asia, but forests are disappearing fast. The third fastest deforestation and degradation rate globally. And we've seen just how vulnerable in recent years Myanmar is to the impact of climate change, to floods, cyclones, and droughts. And we know that forests play an important role in helping manage these risks. So whether that be the protection of mangroves to give coastal communities protection, or managing river flow, or flood management of inland forests. We can also see the importance of forests from a mitigation perspective. Forest loss makes a significant contribution to Myanmar's carbon emissions, 50 million tons CO2 emissions per year. So protecting forests in Myanmar would have a major impact, both in terms of a carbon sink, in terms of contributing to global biodiversity, and to sustain the livelihoods of communities who live in and depend on forest. 80% of the remaining forests are indigenous controlled areas, and these communities are taking a lead in maintaining and protecting their forests through community leadership and participation. So forests matter for Myanmar, but is it possible to do anything in the current environment? And I don't think there is a choice. The UK government continues to be committed to work with and empower local communities and ethnic civil society organizations to help them improve forest management, equitable land tenure, and environmental conservation. And I think this means working with the grain of customary approaches, helping communities exercise transparency, accountability, and inclusive decision-making. All of this is essential not only for the protecting forests and for climate change, but also for Myanmar people's long-term desire to establish genuine democracy. So, for example, in Karen State, we're working with communities on community forestry and watershed management. In Mon State, we're helping efforts to improve natural resource management. And in Kachin State, we work with communities to improve community forestry and increase awareness to climate policies and issues. So this work protects not only the forest, but also benefits communities by reducing vulnerability and contributing to climate change globally. The development choices that Myanmar makes over the coming years will matter and will determine whether it follows a green and resilient path or a route that bakes in vulnerability and increases dependence on highly polluting energy sources. This time last year, we had a close working relationship with government ministries. We were talking daily to ministries, working through what an inclusive process for the NDC would be, making the case for increasing the share of renewable energy in Myanmar's energy mix, and we were making progress together. But as everyone knows, the situation has changed fundamentally, and development partners have had to step back from working with authorities, stopping a whole range of capacity building and policy development projects for kind of obvious reasons. So although now is not the time for a business as usual approach, I hope that the examples of working on forestry shows that there are opportunities to continue to provide support in a careful and conflict-sensitive way that directly help build the resilience of Myanmar people and contribute to strengthening the foundations for a future inclusive democracy. Thank you very much for the chance to join this discussion today. Thank you I'm looking forward to hearing about other panelists and the discussion. Thank you to civil society and local communities for all their efforts in striving to prioritize climate change in such a difficult set of circumstances. Thank you very much.
And thank you very much, Your Excellency. Indeed, asking that important question, can anything be done currently under the current very difficult political situation in Myanmar? And also reminding us how quickly things can change. Just looking back, not even like 1 year back, your partners were very different, and we're very happy to hear that UK continues to be committed to keep supporting Myanmar and finding new partners, and now partnering indeed with people that we have represented here today, Indigenous peoples as well as CSOs, and then emphasizing the importance of forests, protection of forests for people and for the climate in Myanmar. So thank you very much for those opening remarks. And I should say I forgot to introduce myself, so let me just do that as well. My name is Trine Gludoan, and I'm working for WWF Denmark. I'm the climate advisor, and I've been working and living 15 years in Southeast Asia. So indeed, the conversation we're having here today on how can Myanmar develop and become more ambitious is extremely important to me also. So I would like to invite the next speaker, who is my colleague from WWF Myanmar, Shunto O, to introduce to us and talk about the NDC in Myanmar. Mr. Shun, please.
Thank you so much, Trina, and also thank you for giving me the floor. So a little bit of introduction to myself. I'm from Myanmar, and I've been living in the country for more than 30 years. I have a decade of experience in the energy sector, and I am based in Yangon, Myanmar, till now, so not currently. But my country, where I'm from, is a country in Southeast Asia with 54 million people, and also it has approximately 50% of the Myanmar people have access to grid electricity. The country actually has a good forest cover and also has many groups of indigenous people in the country, so it's a diverse country with obviously so many energy resources for renewable energy. The first thing, if you could go to the next slide, I'm going to talk about the NDC. I am also part of the previous administration of government's technical advisory group for collecting and compiling the recommendations for the NDC targets. And what the targets that I'm going to say is an inaugural NDC, which we actually submitted to the government in January 2021. So this is where it is based on. So if you can go to the next slide, what I like to say is in 2015, Myanmar already started its ambition to renewable for the NDC. We submitted the intended NDC that only included forest and energy sector, but in 2021, January 2021, when we submitted the final compilation to the government, it included energy sector, it included forest and land use sector, it also included the agriculture sector. So the ambition is starting to grow. So on the next slide, what we can actually see are energy targets. This is a best case scenario. We are able to see there that renewable energy is potentially increasing. Meanwhile, comparing to the business as usual and the other cases, the NDC is trying to limit coal-fired power and also slow down on gas and mega dams. This is also how the Myanmar NDC is starting to show ambition by separating hydropower and the new renewables, because this is a renewables that we want more for the future. So on the next slide, the main takeaway of the Myanmar NDC as of January 2021 is the NDC, in the best case, is trying to avoid the emission, almost approximately 400 million tons of CO2 equivalent by 2030 cumulatively, also increasing 1.5 folds of renewable energy in the system. So that is from 2,000 megawatt all the way up to more than 3,000 megawatt. We are also trying to limit the deforestation rate 50% by 2030. So on the next slide, so what we are going to say is this NDC also could be aligned with what ASEAN joint statement just released a few days ago. So where the association is going to aim higher for the energy targets, including energy efficiency. Right now in the region, across ASEAN region, across Southeast Asia, we have approximately 13-14% of renewable energy in the mix. Myanmar have to keep up because right now we have 40 megawatt in the system. That is less than 1 megawatt, and our NDC's ambition is actually significantly higher. So speaking of, if we can go to the next slide then, how is Myanmar going to pull off the ambition for the renewable energy? How is the vision is going to look like is the next part. So in 2020, civil society and the non-state actors and other actors trying to come up with a vision for the renewable energy to influence the NDC, of course, in the implementation and also next NDCs to come. The purpose of this non-state actor study is to create the civil society-led discussions for the higher ambition of renewable energy in the NDC targets, to strengthen the renewable energy collaboration between state actors when we have state actors again, and also the non-state actors, also to encourage the renewable energy shares in the current and the next NDC. So if I may go into a little bit technical, together with the partners, in the next slide, if I may go into the little bit of technical details, this is what demand from Myanmar looks like today and also looks like in the future. In the non-state actor studies, what we have developed is 3 different scenarios. Business as usual on one hand is actually based off the base case is based off of NDC business as usual, so the baseline. But in the increased renewable energy scenario, what we come up with is more shares of renewable for the country. But we also want to do better. So in this independent study, in we also added one more scenario called advanced scenario, where technologies develop faster, costs become cheaper than expected. Then how does it look like? So from 2020 to 2050, we can see that from approximately 25,000 gigawatt hour per year of demand, we will go up all the way up to 180,000 to 230,000 gigawatt hours of electricity demand per year. So if we have a demand now, how are we going to fulfill it? So please let me show the base case on the next slide. This is what the base case looks like. This is also based off of NDC's business as usual scenario. There still are a lot of coal, there still are a lot of gas, and the hydropower are also mega dams. We also notice, since it is based off of NDC's baseline rather than the new ambition, there are also very small fractions of renewable power in the system. We want to do better, non-state actors want to do better. So on the next slide, what you are actually seeing is above is the alternative energy mix for generation, which is a graph above, and also the installed capacity, which is a graph below. So those are very correlated. And compared to the base, which is the first column of the bar, we have a better inclusion of renewable energy in the middle column, where we can see coal could be removed, where we see more solar, more wind, more biomass, and we're introducing green hydrogen, and we are also limiting the amount of hydropower in the mix. But in the advanced scenario, where we are trying to achieve is 100% renewable energy by 2050, where we try to up the ambition for more renewables. So we have a supply, and what we also notice is 100% of Myanmar's electricity demand for the long run could be fulfilled by the mix of renewable energy, sustainable sources. So we have a supply, we have a demand. So why would we do that? So in the next slide, what we can see is the main reason. Ladies, gentlemen, we are talking live from the COP26 location, and the amount of avoided emission is what we want for Myanmar. In the red line for the base case is, since there are a lot of fossil fuel, the emission is just off the chart. However, if we actually go for either increased renewable energy or even maximum share of renewable energy system, what we can see in the difference between the red line and the green line is approximately 85 million tons of CO2 equivalent per year. We have an emission mandate. Can we actually afford it? So in the next slide, what I also would like to show is Myanmar is still a developing country with limited economy. So is it actually cost more to do renewable? Our study shows it isn't. It is very competitive. And what we even found out is if we go full renewable energy, then we can actually see it is actually cheaper in the more advanced scenario. So the main takeaways on my next slides are, for the investment, we are also expecting $120 billion investment by 2050 to keep up with the demand. And for the generation sector, it is approximately $80 billion that we are requiring. So on the next slide, here are my main takeaway. 100% renewable energy from Myanmar is definitely doable by 2050. The levelized cost of renewable energy is very competitive compared to the other scenario. Even though we limit the hydropower, there still is we are managed to maintain the grid stability. But last but not least, for the purpose of climate mitigation, we are also trying to avoid 85 million tons of CO2 equivalent per year. So with that, the report is already available on the next slide. So if anybody is interested, you can already visit our website and look at the civil society-led report. And with that, I'd like to conclude that. So thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Mr. Shun, showing us that science speaks very clearly. Also in this case, you've concluded this very important piece of analysis, and the science shows us that actually Myanmar can supply with 100% renewable energy. Very impressive, and very, very clearly also indeed that it's even cheaper than going the business as usual pathway. So we've heard the science view, and now we turn over to hear the people's view. I think the ambassador said that the partners has changed. There are no longer any government to work with in Myanmar, but something is not changing is the people. The people is still there, civil society is still there, so being there to be a part of Myanmar's development. So I'm very happy to invite you, Madam EE. I know it's been a long struggle even to come here and be with us in Glasgow. Also you, Mr. Shun, so thank you very much for making that effort. And please share with us your views in terms of how Indigenous people can play a role in the climate action of Myanmar. Thank you.
Yes, thank you very much. First of all, I would like to introduce a little bit of my organization point. Stand for Promotion of Indigenous and Nature Together. This is the organization that we started in 2013, just after the country changes into democratic transition. We are thinking that there should have an organization working for Indigenous people, right by Indigenous people in the country. And for Indigenous people, we are living in nature, living with forest, mountain, and rivers, that living closely to nature. And for Indigenous people, the land that we live and the customary practice that we have are very much important. For that reason, we also think that everything have changing with the country's sustainable development approaches and environment activity we should engage in. For that reason, we also engage with climate change, CBD, biodiversity initiative of the country, including customary land tenure recognition processes. So we have been engaging not only at the national level, but also regional at ASEAN level and international level, like this in COP, UNFCCC processes since COP20. The main reason is that for us, Indigenous people in Myanmar, we don't have awareness about our rights in the past, but we learn from other country, our neighboring country, and also we learn from other Indigenous people who are working hard for their rights and role and promotion and protection. So throughout this time, we try to bring up the voices of the community at different level, and also sharing of what is happening at the international level that can have impact on Indigenous people on the ground, trying to be like a linkage and the bridge of information sharing to them. And here on today, I would like to share a little bit about the climate change impact on Indigenous people in Myanmar, and what is their current perspective, and what kind of recommendation they have, and what is the future for us. No? Yeah, that is my message bringing here. And the next one is I would like to show the outline, and along with the outline, I also put the map of with the color of our country, which show that just before we come and engage here amid the crisis, we also happen to have a kind of consultation meeting with some of the Indigenous community of the country, so that we can bring their message here. So the map also show the places, the representative, that we can discuss just before we come here on their current status about climate change impact and their views. No? So I would like to talk about the views of Indigenous people in our country on climate change. Later, we would like to highlight the role, what is our role. Then we would like to come up with the support needed and the recommendation on that. No? Thank you, Nace. And then for indigenous people, when we discuss, no, okay, how do you see climate change? What kind of thing you can highlight about climate change has impact on you? What kind of thing you face everyday life, no? Then everyone talk about the temperature, higher temperature. Our country is already tropical country, but with that, we even experience more higher temperature in different part of the country, different indigenous community in either they are up in the highland or on the plain. Everyone, they say that we faced with high temperature, and also they realize the irregular rainfall and all 3 seasons, the seasonal pattern change. And then when they explain, they say that, oh, I don't say like this only with my experience. I asked to my grandparents, and they compare and explain what are the changes in their time with us, and we learned that climate change has impact on us. And then they also, all the indigenous people, their livelihood depend on cultivation, plantation, and they also experience with the increase of drought even, and also storm hitting to them, and then strong wind, flooding, things like those natural disasters they are facing. Even with this year, amid the crisis in some part of the country, we are facing with flood as well, and people have to suffer a lot as well. In 2015 also, we have out of 15 regions of the country, 11 regions has been flooded, and those floods has impact more on indigenous people who are vulnerable because of limited access to the services on health, education, and basic things that they are needed in their region, because of we are also a developing country. So they encounter and they already aware much about the climate change impact on their daily life and in all aspects of their life. And also the pest destruction to the crop is much happening, and because their livelihood is a kind of self-sufficient economy, and they don't rely to the market much, and then when the crops are destroyed, it's also threatened to their food security. And they also notice that they are not the main contributor to climate change, the causes of climate change, but they become the victim. And then they are suffering in their daily life. So this is the view that they have on climate change, and all these, we have a discussion with the Kachin, Karanchin, Southern Shan, Naga, and Magwe, Ashochen community of our region in the middle of the Burma. So all are the input and discussion we have with the community on this. Next, please. And okay, we are suffering from climate change, but how about what can we contribute to climate change solution? Being in the community, living in the forest, sometimes we may not even reach up to what are happening and discussing here like this in COP, but no one come and give them duty that you must do this or this, but in their daily life, without anyone pressuring them to do anything, they are living in harmony with nature. And then they have conserved area, they have certain area that they conserve for their customary practices. And they also keep sacred area of some places in mountain, water, land, and forest. They have sacred area that they protect. No one asks them to protect, but this is their culture practice and their traditional belief. And they are conserving not only the land, also the fauna and flora species, especially in terms of medicinal plant. They have certain value on plant and species for their medicine purpose as well. And they also take care of the watershed because water is important for them. And for watershed area, they also never cut down the trees in those areas for them to live there forever. No? And then they also deliver, especially indigenous women, like I'm like me, Indigenous woman. I always will want to highlight on woman role, no? That we are the one who pass on the Indigenous knowledge to generation. So in that way, no, there is no documentation, but they pass on those knowledge and keep taking care of the natural environment they have. These are the role and contribution that Indigenous people have on their land. Thank you, and next. So we can highlight the role that we play. We also know there is an impact. What kind of support needed for them? Because we have the crisis in the country, so we are asking, okay, maybe there are not many things that we can do at the moment. However, if you can come up with something that we should work in collaboration for some kind of support, so that we can keep our value, we can keep our good practices and our roles, no? What are things needed for you? And we ask for them. And then we discuss about especially we are already have impact on climate change. So the climate change adaptation measure at the country should reach to the community level, or when community level, because sometimes some of the plan and things like that is only at the national level and never reach to the community, but the community are the ones suffer day to day. And they also need to get awareness about what is happening at the global level, so that they can link up and they can also voice out, no, on their things. Another thing is like because of this one is because of the current struggle, they also talk about humanitarian and some relief program for their food security during the crisis. And livelihood support, no, means Indigenous people, they don't need to cut down all the tree from the forest for their livelihood. They can survive with their rotational farming. They can produce non-timber forest product, but they cannot access to the market because of so many limitations and not limited capacity on that as well. So they are saying that even to overcome the challenges and amid the crisis, if there is a little bit of livelihood support to open up the way for them, then they are also able to overcome it, no? And also technical and financial support for legal recognition of the rights and rules of Indigenous people. This is the thing that every time, every year, for many years, we have been working, and we still want to continue working on it. Legal thing, sometimes Indigenous people, they know about their customary law, but maybe they cannot reach out to the legal thing in the national system. But if they can get a kind of technical thing, support, and to work on this in future, this is also what they really want for it, for a real change happen to them in a legal way. And then documentation of Indigenous knowledge. We always say we have good practices, but sometimes without documenting, sometimes we say like we cannot have evidence. So they are also interested in trying to document of their Indigenous knowledge, but maybe some of them, they will also have a kind of intellectual property right over their knowledge, things like that. That's that thing. And the final thing that they are discussing also is the dedicated fund. Here in the COP, we heard about the country state have a declaration and the pledge, but by the time we discuss now, they don't know about it, but only when we arrive, we got to know it. But they also need a dedicated fund that directly support the work and the activity they want to be doing at the ground, and to raise their voices at different level, no? To have more representation of their voices as well. These are the things we discuss with them together. And we have come up with several recommendations. However, first thing, as an overall, if we have to talk about our recommendation, the first thing is like in Asia, similar to other countries, not only my country, is that the recognition of Indigenous people. Sometimes state may say that there is no Indigenous people in the country, or everyone is Indigenous people in the country, and then this become like way to avoid how to address the real role and rights of indigenous people in the country. The second thing is, even though there may have acknowledgement, we start having awareness about indigenous people rights mentioned in the UN DRIP, and changes started, but in the legal way, recognition in the law and policy is like very limited space. Only a phrase, only mentioned in somewhere, and then if it is not solely intended with the political will to recognize in the legal system, it's very difficult to have it implemented on the ground as well. And even if with the open door that we can engage and we know of change, sometimes when we're trying to go and follow up to find out about the implementation, this is not yet at that level, things like that. No, for example, customary land tenure, we still need a long way to go for more of implementation on the ground. And FPIC, free, prior, and informed consent is included as a safeguard in different mechanisms, but there is no such consultation happen in the country so far up to date. So these are the things we need at step-by-step changing and make a real change for the country, for indigenous people, and for the future long-term impact of climate change response in the country. No? So that's why our first recommendation, we talk about the respect and recognizing the rights and the role, and we can be the partner in combating climate change. We are already doing it, or even with the crisis we'll be there and doing it, but we need this so that to protect our rights as well. And climate change action of the country, especially the NDC, the state need to recognize, and NDC, current NDC, Sean already highlight from the technical part that difficult for me to understand, but I can realize those kind of technical thing is also important. And however, there should also have a section in the substance of NDC specifically mentioned about indigenous people. At the moment, it's only like, indigenous people technology, indigenous people are vulnerable, something like that. That is all. And then how can we take those phrases into actual implementation on the ground? No? So we would like to really see the NDC with the I think WWF, NDC, we want also a checklist on those parts as part of social justice, and these are important for us, no, from our perspective. And the process of NDC development. So if we want it and you just write for it, it's not the way it should be in the NDC. We should have a meaningful participation in the process of this development. And not only indigenous people, there might have civil society and other relevant stakeholders discuss together. Even if we have a certain disagreement, we can have a dialogue to discuss together to have a meaningful participation and development of an NDC, no, of the country. That's what we want for, no? Please, next. Another thing is we look at to the mitigation and adaptation measure, starting from the planning, implementation, monitoring. Those all should go. So, okay, we want NDC with a meaningful participation. But later, when there is actual action also throughout the process, there should have a continuous continuous participation and continuous engagement and the practice of FPIC, so that we can really come up with the action which is real, action which is alive, action which is effective. No? So we also would like to recommend on that, and grievance mechanism. Okay, sometimes different people will act in different way, but if there is no grievance mechanism, how can we find out where are the gaps and what happened? So we also would like to highlight about there is a need of grievance mechanism as an independent body when implementing and working on climate change action of the country, especially with a sensitive country like ours. No? We would like to recommend on that. Yeah, next please. Yeah, UN agency in Myanmar. We would like to give recommendation because although we come and engage in UNFCCC climate change like that, maybe other UN agency of our country, they have their own mandate, and sometimes what we learn from here, when some of their implementation of work in the country link back to climate change, but they are not linked to those safeguards and things mentioned about indigenous people. So it's become separate. So we come here, we talk actively, but going back, and then we cannot link back. So it will be very difficult for us. So we really want to recommend to UN agency in our country to integrate the work as for the part of rights and also the action of climate change in their work to be linked up, so that we can work collaboratively. And our country is like very much prone to natural disaster, at risk of climate change, so economic, politically vulnerable, and instability with the COVID-19 situation as well. So we would like to recommend the international aid to reach to the local level, which is already highlighted, but with the current situation, we want to highlight again. And private sector and business to comply with the safeguard. Different private sector, they should practice best practice and also comply with the safeguard. Even sometimes people are trying to avoid the safeguard because our country don't have maybe international law or things like that. But if you have international standard, why can't you do a good practice, practicing in our country with the, although we are still gap in the national law and policy, things like that. Now we would like to recommend on, and it should not be just a checkbox tick. Thank you. And a recommendation, too many recommendations because we have too many sorry, maybe. International Development and Conservation Agency, and also need to work closely with us, indigenous people, and respect FPIC, so that we can work hand in hand, and future climate change related activity in the country. Also, at the moment, because of maybe being a developing country, started approaching things now. Some of the solution are only has short-term solution, short-term actions that only have short-term impact. But we need to see the future long-term impact, the action that can last long, so that we don't have to do repeated repeated solution and repeated way of responding to climate change. So like I really support to Siaxiong presentation about the energy sector, because it's look for the future in the long term. That's what we want, also. And then a strong international effort, and also need to bring peace and stability of our country, and also to continue support to the community, to make a lasting change as well. And thank you. Nice. I just want to show this one, a children getting a helping hand, but he is still in the water, I see the children as my country. So we really want to raise out our voices that climate change is not a joke. Indigenous people, we are there, and our voices should be heard. Yeah, thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Ii, bringing the voices from many ethnic groups in Myanmar and showing us when we say that Myanmar is the second most vulnerable country to climate change in the world, giving us like very detailed insight into that. Also emphasizing that we need to recognize the role of the people, the indigenous people, and the rights of the indigenous people, even there's not a government. This should be respected by the international community. And then I think you said we need to bring the pledges from Glasgow to reach the people, to reach the indigenous people. And now we move into the question and answer, but I would just, so I'd just like to invite people from the room, or also here for any virtual participants that would like to make questions. So let me open the floor, please. We have a question here. you can just take down the... Hang on a second. Turning on the microphone.
I guess I have a question and a statement as well. So just a statement for EE first. It's amazing to hear about the role that Indigenous people are playing in your country, and it just sounds like we all actually have a lot to learn from the practices that you are already doing. And I think documenting your knowledge and practices that you've been doing for all these years might be a really helpful way to share that with everybody else. Because there are definitely things that even people in cities can definitely take from this. And then I didn't catch your name because I came in slightly late.
It's Sean.
Sean. So I noticed in your projections that you wanted to eliminate coal by 2050, but I wondered, what about 2030? Are you still planning to use coal then? I didn't see your numbers for 2030, so I was keen to see how quickly you were planning to phase out coal use.
Thank you. Thank you for the question. So the first thing about Myanmar, so which for time limitation I didn't cover much, so thank you for the opportunity. So right now Myanmar only has 120 megawatt of coal, so that is approximately 2%, 3% of the existing. So in terms of phasing out, like in the plan and also sadly including in the NDC, we still see a percentage of coal in the national plans. However, the non-state actors in the projection that we actually did is we would like to phase out the existing 120 megawatt and also do not plan more coal-fired power plants in the country. For example, where EE is from, in the southeastern Myanmar, where there are many indigenous people living. So anytime we set up a coal-fired power plant, it is also affecting the livelihood, lives, and also nature in that particular region. So while there's still a plan, we are still trying to come up with the alternative mechanism or the technology, and by not implementing more coal and not not doing that, we are trying to make sure there are more solars, there are more wind, and there are also more indigenous people locally approved renewable energy technology implemented. So long story short, actually we are trying to make sure that the coal doesn't happen, and then all the sources are actually replaced, even in the plants are replaced with the new renewables. That's the purpose, and thank you for your question.
Thank you, and I would like to see if there's any questions from the virtual audience. Not right now, then certainly I have a question. Thanks a lot for that question. So we see that there is a renewable energy pathway for Myanmar, but then I think a question that many would have is, with such a great expansion of, for example, solar power, could that have a negative impact? What would that mean in relation to the land rights and the land use of, for example, indigenous people? So maybe Shun and EE, both of you can just speak to that point.
Absolutely. Shama, can I start? Oh, perfect. So that is correct. So even up to now, if we actually want to implement maybe 1 megawatt of solar power, it is approximately, in our local measurement, it's approximately 2.5 acres. So meaning that if we expand, there will be more land use. And then one of the key consideration, environmental and also human right consideration, is no, we do not use agricultural lands because that's where we eat. No, we do not use the community lands because that's where we live. Usually where we are trying to use is the shrublands and the wastelands, which is actually abundant in the central Myanmar and also many parts of the Myanmar that are not existing agricultural land or the forest land or the community forest land of the indigenous people. So this is where we are aiming. I agree that solar actually also have its risks of potential land grabbing. But in case when we start the planning process, just like EE said, if we include the planning process, not the consultation, planning as a stakeholder to the local people, then we can actually direct to where to put the solar panels, then that question could be easily resolved. So thank you for the question.
Thank you, Shun. EE, you want to add to that?
Yeah. I just want to add that for indigenous people, we are not against to all kind of development. We want to develop, but in the way that is appropriate to our culture. And most of the, according to the experience from most of the consultation, as I mentioned, there is no FPIC yet, but there is a need to practice and conduct FPIC. And in terms of consultation, to use appropriate language, sometimes even with the technical thing, and coming up with the language not familiar to indigenous people, then during the consultation, they will just be confused and not being able to make decision properly. And to use a kind of easy to understand and really inform, no? In FPIC, we say inform. So sometimes they need to have understand both benefit and the positive one and the negative one as well, to clearly explain on that, so that community can have trust upon the process, things like that. And then, for example, sometime appropriate place as well, no? For the community. If you are at a place where they have like there are some places that if there are indigenous people giving example that, oh, we are at a big hotel and having the meeting, and I afraid that if I don't say yes, I cannot go back to my community. So things like that. So in terms of the process, to be careful with those kind of detail. And yeah, thank you. That's one.
Thank you very much, EE. And I know, in fact, WWF and Point are partners in Myanmar, and that so this renewable energy development is possible when you do engagement properly, when you expect the rights, respect the rights, and have truly informed decisions from the side of the locals. And now I think we have a question from our virtual audience, so I'll just ask our support in Myanmar to read that question aloud.
Hi, I actually have two questions. One is for EE and one is for Shun. So Shun, the question posed to you is, in the current circumstances of reducing investment in Myanmar, what practical steps do you see that can be implemented in order for renewables to increase? And then for EE, there's a question beyond COP. How can indigenous people call for better recognition of the climate crisis in community areas and strengthen nature-based solution practices?
Please go ahead.
Thank you. So thank you for the question. So speaking of investment, I also briefly said, in order to develop it up to 2050, there are a lot more billions of dollars requirement in the sector, which is also why we separate it as network, grid, transmission and infrastructure, the generation infrastructure, and also we added one more called mini grids. So everybody know what is happening in Myanmar, what is happening with the investment. So the key right now, also again respecting the local people's right, is I foresee more mini grids and also decentralized energy, renewable energy happening in the country. So some of the part that I want to highlight is there still is electricity demand for both household use and also productive use. There still are the needs and wants of the community for the sustainable access to power. So there are also local and also international farms who can actually develop mini grids sustainably and also fully informed. What we actually need to, what I foresee more happening now is international actors and also local stakeholders work together directly as a non-state actor model, so the investments could be directly with the village communities and local communities, and also the investment security or the demand, and the payment could be from the community to the investors or the developers directly. So I think I very much appreciate the question, and I'm very happy to highlight the importance of a non-state actor model where all these stakeholders come together and work for the decentralized renewable energy. So thank you.
Thank you, Shun. So it is actually possible already now to work with the non-state actors to make investments into renewable energy. Thank you for that reply. Heron, I think there was a second question.
Should I? Yeah,
please.
Yes. At the COP here is for us to raise our voices and to learn about the different commitment happening here. But what is really important for Indigenous people is the changes happen on the ground. And with the current, in an ideal situation, there, as we already mentioned, there should have separate Indigenous people rights and role recognition in the NDC, in the climate change action and things like that, as well as rights for Indigenous people to their land, territory, and natural resources. But in a short time and in an immediate response that we should do, even the crisis happen in the country, is that the documentation of Indigenous knowledge, where in some part of the country where they can continue work doing that at a certain level. And another thing we are thinking is also like the food for environment and food for waste management, food for watershed protection, a kind of a mixed action we can do with the humanitarian livelihood and the environment protection activity with the community level. That, as I mentioned, they already doing it, but if we can engage in a way that fulfill their need at the same time, taking care of the environment they care for together with them. These are the things we have to continue doing it, even whatever crisis happen in the country. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you, EE, also for showing us that there are ways, even under the current situation in Myanmar, that partners, international partners, can work with indigenous people and civil society to react to climate change and the challenges also socioeconomically. And then for highlighting the point that the indigenous people's rights should be recognized in the NDCs, bringing us back to actually the topic of the session today, having more ambitious NDCs, the NDCs we want. And I would say we've heard from the partnership between WWF and also Point in Myanmar that things can be done currently. I think you said, EE, indigenous people live in harmony with nature. That is exactly the mission of WWF. So I think we have a strong partnership here, and now it's up to the international community to make the pledges reach the indigenous people. So thank you very much for today.